Great. Welcome to our session today on financing and implementing quality services for supportive housing conversion projects. Just a quick word about CSH. We are a national nonprofit and we have staff and offices throughout the country. We focus on supportive housing and housing solutions that improve the lives of vulnerable people. We also help communities maximize public resources through creating supportive housing, and our ultimate goal is to build strong, healthy communities. Today's presenters will be Alyssa Langeth, who is a senior program manager here at CSH. We also have Marcella McGuire, who is the director of health and systems integration at CSH. And then we're also joined by Rafael Pagan Jr., who is the executive director of Pacific House, and then Kelly Ryder, who is the government affairs manager for King County Department of Community and Human Services. And then finally, we're joined by Deidre Bolden, who is the director of the Southeast region here at CSH. Just a quick overview for today. We're going to talk to you about tools to develop, plan, and implement quality supportive services and supportive housing conversion projects. Next, we'll jump into strategies to leverage cross-sector resources to finance services. And then we're going to share with you some community examples and some lessons from the field. We're going to have a moderated panel and facilitated discussion, and then we will leave plenty of time at the end for your questions.
Great, thank you, Amber. So we're going to jump right into discussing how to ensure quality services are incorporated into your supportive housing projects right from day one. And then we'll talk about some tools available to you to help you incorporate the quality services. As you know, right now we're at a time with an unprecedented amount of federal funding available to develop these supportive housing projects, especially for property conversions like hotels and motels. And we need to ensure that quality services are front and center in the planning and development of the housing so that the supportive housing that's developed allows tenants to really thrive in the community. So ensuring quality from day one, CSH has developed a suite of tools to ensure that quality is embedded in supportive housing and to help projects begin planning and implementing it early on. CSH has a quality toolkit and guide that contains tools, templates, project profiles, and examples for anyone interested in creating or maintaining quality supportive housing. And at the end, we'll provide a link to that toolkit and guidebook that's on our website. And in addition to that quality toolkit, we have other resources that are available to you to help you provide quality services in your project. So there's really, we look at it having three quality services in the three aspects of the project. We want to make sure that quality services are embedded into the planning. So that means starting at day one when the project teams really is first brought together. So that would be the developer, service provider, the community, property managers. So really from that point on, service quality needs to be front and center. So to help projects and development teams and the project teams do that, CSH has created a commitment to quality checklist that is extremely helpful during the pre-development process. I'm going to talk about the commitment to quality checklist in greater detail in the next slide. So I'll jump right into the quality endorsement. This is another tool that CSH has and for supportive housing, and it is presented to project sponsors during the planning and the development of the supportive housing to those who demonstrate a commitment to CSH's dimensions of quality standard across all projects and components. So what the pre-development quality endorsement does is it has CSH staff provide a third-party review of your documentation of quality services for your supportive housing projects. And this happens in pre-development, and it ensures that your services meet national quality standards. And then the last thing I want to talk about in quality planning is supportive housing institutes. This is a signature training that CSH does that provides, it allows teams, supportive housing teams, to come together and learn how to develop, implement, and create supportive housing all the way through planning through implementation. And you work through your project over a series of, used to be in person, but now web-based meetings where you create service plans, go over capital service, operating funding, and really CSH will provide technical assistance for you, to you during that. The next set of tools available for you is once your project is actually in service. So you've gotten through that pre-development phase, construction, if it's a site-based supportive housing project, and you're in operation. So that we have a quality self-assessment tool where you can go through and rate yourself on our dimensions of quality. We can provide TA, and then also that quality toolkit that I mentioned previously has samples and examples of memorandums of understanding between the service providers, the property managers, and the owners. And then quality certification is the last tool in that quality in action step. And the quality certification is a process that evaluates existing supportive housing, either site-based or scattered site, to determine if they meet or exceeds CSH's quality dimensions of quality supportive housing. Projects that meet those dimensions will then get a stamp of approval. And then the final stage is the quality sustained. So making sure that in your community, supportive housing is sustained and there's a pipeline developed to really meet the need of some of the community's most marginalized populations. And what we mean by built it into systems, making sure that supportive housing is embedded in some of your financing structures. So having supportive housing mentioned in your QAP, prioritized by some of the major funders in your state, and then really looking at it from a systems level. Another way is the supportive housing institute. So I mentioned those during planning, but they're also a way to really create that pipeline. So as funding comes out, there's new projects and project teams that are ready to tackling the large task of creating supportive housing. And then finally, to ensure that the quality is maintained throughout the whole lifespan of the project is a recertification. So now I'm going to talk about the commitment to quality checklists. So this tool is really helpful when early on in the pre-development stage. So when projects are first sitting around a table, the developer, the service provider, any sort of property manager. And it really helps that quality is embedded throughout the life of the project. Funders of supportive housing need assurances that the quality services will be met, so tenants can really thrive in the supportive housing. So this commitment to quality checklist is a 3-page document that can be used to both show funders that the project team is committed to quality services so people can thrive, but it also can be used just by the project team to make sure that the quality aligns with those dimensions of quality that CSH has. The components of the checklist that I believe is most important is that verifiable quality measure. So that third column in that picture. So what this is it's really examples and of documentation or action items that the project team can complete to make sure that planning for services is embedded throughout the project. So for example, take the first line, that tenant-driven planning. We can all agree that tenant-driven planning is essential for quality services to be a part of the project. Um, but how do we know that this is happening? How do we ensure that the project team is doing it? This checklist gives you examples and documentations. So for the tenant-driven planning, one of the examples is that during the project planning, the development team, project sponsors, service planner, service providers meet with a tenant that represents the target population group, or holds a focus group to make sure that the tenant's voice is embedded during those plannings. There are 49 verifiable quality measures in this checklist to help projects through the pre-development phase. So I really encourage you to check them out, and we will provide links to both the guide and this checklist in the chat for you. And I'm going to pass it over to Marcella, who's going to dive into budgeting and financing.
Hey, everybody, welcome, and looking forward to this conversation today as well. We're going to talk particularly about where you start and you're thinking about services and services financing, and then where you go and what opportunities we have out in the communities right now, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, CARES Act funding, and some other resources we'll talk about today. So next slide, please. The first place we really want to start, I think, is to help and think about what's the problem we're solving for? So right now we exist in communities where we're running on a scarcity model. There's too few resources, services in particular, often for folks coming from the housing development and housing financing world, the most difficult nut to crack, if you will, from the services perspective. Right now, how it exists in communities is that the current reality is that most of negotiating multiple sectors falls on individuals and families, providers, really sophisticated providers were able to blend and weave funding, but there's very little of that relatively little of the government organization, falls mostly on individuals, families. We really want to flip that pyramid. We want to begin to build cross-sector referral systems. We want to build cross-sector funder opportunities. That really lives in the public sector. It lives with support from the private sector. Then it lives with providers, so that hopefully what families and individuals can access is what in the healthcare world is often called no wrong door. No matter whatever door you walk through, you receive the services packages that you need. So that's the problem that we're solving for, and the systems that we're trying to build towards. So next slide, please. So where we start as we think about services is the most important question to think about to start is, what does it truly cost? Far too often the services are too light, are too thin, because it's not clear where the services funding is coming from. It's not clear how you weave those funding streams together. Government partners might not have made that as easy as they could be. There might not be that level of collaboration. So it's important to start from a quality perspective, from a quality model, and think about, okay, what is the staffing model that we want to use, and what does it cost to successfully execute that staffing model? It's different staffing models that we talk about. CSH has what's called a services budget tool. It's free, it's online. It allows you to basically, for any individual project, for a system as a whole, it allows you to determine what would it cost to actually do these services in a quality manner. We look at 4 different potential staffing models that are commonly looked at, aligned with supportive housing, within supportive housing. One is an assertive community treatment team model. 2 is an intensive case management model. Both of those call primarily from the behavioral health sector. A critical time intervention model, that's often a transitional model, and then tenancy supports, the service coordination that lives within the housing. So the way the tool works is that you make some selections here. You select the staffing model, you select your target population, how many units, are we talking individuals or families, are they new to supported housing, and you enter what salaries are, what your administrative rates, all kinds of details are there. Then that will give you, based on the tool and based on your answers, it will give you staffing and caseload recommendations. It will give you what multi-year service budgets look like. It will help you develop rates if you're working in a state with a managed care, with the Medicaid Tenancy Support Services benefit. You may be negotiating with managed care. You need to be able to say, this is what it costs to do the services, and it calculates net costs and revenue there. Thank you, Amber, for the link that is up in the chat as well. I think far too often we come from we'll do the services we get funded for, as opposed to we will do the services that ensure quality. We really need to shift that conversation and say, we as a supportive housing provider can do the services, but here's how it costs, here's how it, and here's what that costs. So next slide, please. So the next question you will say is, gosh, I don't know, where is my state on a tenancy support benefit? CSH, this map will be up on the CSH website in a couple of days, but for now, we're happy to share. These are the states that currently either the purple ones they cover or have the potential to cover tenancy support services in their benefit. Other states may be planning, they may be submitting a state plan amendment or Medicaid waiver in order to cover tenancy support services in their Medicaid plan, or they may be negotiating. So the two states that I really want to shout out, they've been doing this both the longest and most effectively, are Washington State. They've had a tenancy support benefit, what they call foundational community support services, since 2017, 2018, and then Minnesota, that's had what they call housing stabilization services, and that's been available since July of 2020. Both of those benefits are available statewide, and these are for individuals who are Medicaid eligible, who are Medicaid enrolled, and who meet the needs-based criteria or population criteria as determined by the state. We see a lot of other states are building the benefits or they're planning that process. As a supportive housing provider and developer, if you're in a state that doesn't have that benefit, it's really important to check out and see where the advocacy efforts are in order to put that benefit in place. I will highlight that some of these benefits are only for certain populations, and it's very important. This is where we need cross-sector alignment at the government level to make sure that the new housing resources align with the new services resources, particularly from a population standpoint. I like to say that if the services are only for people who are left-handed and the housing is only for people that are right-handed, then you've got a problem there. You don't have aligned definitions. Only ambidextrous people, and we're very few and far between, are able to receive that. So that's some of the conversation and the level of collaboration you're really trying to push at the state and local level to make sure those populations are aligned. And we'll keep this updated, and we hope to see the rest of that map filled in sometime soon. So yes, Dana Schultz asked, in Washington and Minnesota, do service providers and housing have to be Medicaid billing agencies to use those benefits? The answer to that is yes. You do have to do what's called, go through a provider enrollment process to be a Medicaid eligible determination. That is something that's required at the state and federal level. And as we think about the new services and the new funding that's coming, particularly some of the home art funds and some of the other new federal resources from ARPA or the CARES Act, we know that agencies are going to need what we think of as an on-ramp to Medicaid. No one wakes up today and says, we're going to build Medicaid. It's a long and arduous process. What makes it worth it is the potential we have for scale. Agencies, as they begin to think about trying to build out that on-ramp for Medicaid, they need to think about it in a couple of different ways. One, you have to start tracking new information. You have to track who you serve, what populations you serve, what insurance status is of those individuals. Do they have healthcare coverage or not? Who are they covered by? Are they covered by managed care, by the veterans insurance? Do they have Medicare or Medicaid? Those are the questions that you want to be asking about your population and making some determinations. You have to enroll as a provider in order to be Medicaid, again, to Dana's question. You generally speaking, this is not required in Minnesota, but in most cases, you have to, especially if you're doing anything large, you have to purchase a HIPAA compliant billing system. That's something that often has to be fundraised for. You're going to have to revise your policies and procedures to Medicaid compliant processes. You're going to have to reorient staff and job roles to billing and the documentation required for billing. And then you're going to have to possibly have contracts or provider agreements or something with managed care if you're in a managed care state. These are just examples of the factors and components to a plan that you have to think about as an agency to becoming an on-ramp to those Medicaid services as they become available. As you can see, none of these are quick and dirty processes. These are things that take time, they take a plan, and they commonly take resources to dedicate to that as well. So next slide, please. So as you begin to build these partnerships, you should be asking some foundational questions. As you begin to think about how do we engage on the services question, you want to ask some who's. Who are we billing? Literally, who are we sending what, what materials, what invoices, what documentation to? Are you billing the state Medicaid office? Are you billing managed care? This is different state to state and benefit to benefit. Who are you working with? Health centers. Know that health centers can be your partners in this work. They already have these administrative processes filled up. They might be a good partner for you for a billing partnership. You may be looking at behavioral health authorities or public health authorities. These are also engaged entities who are invested in more supportive housing for a variety of reasons, and there might be development opportunities there that you want to engage with. And then also you want to set priorities for engagement based on need. If you're focused on a chronically homeless population, you're obviously probably engaged with your COC, but who else do you need to engage with? You need to engage with local managed care, or a lot of the folks aging. So you want to focus with that sector. With a lot of folks experiencing chronic homelessness have behavioral health challenges. You want to engage those folks. Each of these entities in our communities have new resources from ARPA, from CARES Act, hopefully in the future from the FY22 budget, federal budget, et cetera. There's a lot of opportunities there, but you need to expand your networks and you need to expand and you need to figure out how your priorities, your population, your activities align with some of these other entities who fund services as well. One, what do you need? Clarify your ask, quantify your ask. No, I need help, I need services money. That's good, that's a start, that's not enough. You need an ask that is, we have the potential to open 50 units here. We have done the services budget tool. This is the per diem rate that we need in order to do an assertive community treatment model and serve these individuals. It's the more specific you can be in your ask, the more engagement you will get with these systems, and the more serious these other systems that you might not already know and be working with regularly be able to take you. Think about overlaps and agendas. What are the pain points between you and your potential partners? I may be focused on ending chronic homelessness. Another group may be focused on making sure that people no longer cycle between jails and or emergency departments or inpatient units, et cetera. Those are agendas that are very, very easily aligned. You want to work with them together. I will say that another common agenda we see right now because of COVID, the number of elderly adults who passed away from COVID in congregate settings, nursing home settings, very, very high. Do you want to build an aging project? Well, is that something that you can collaborate with your local aging systems for, your local Medicaid systems for, in order to build that aging supportive housing project you're thinking about? How do your activities, what you're willing to do, serve their agenda as you engage with service partners? No, they don't understand housing financing. They don't understand development. They see how their systems are impacted by the housing crisis in their community and the affordable housing crisis in their community. But they don't really know what to do with that, and they need you right now as much as you need them. Think about how all of these other sector activities can serve your agenda. You want to grow, you want new development, you want good usage of the affordable housing funds you're getting, but you want to create supportive, you need those services partners. And then define services for your partners. Help them understand what's the difference between an assertive community treatment model versus a tenancy support model. Are you referring people to community services? Or are you delivering community services? All of these questions are important, and as you begin to understand these other sectors, as you engage them, don't be afraid to say, as they ask you common questions, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I might have to do more research on that. I might not understand that. You come to the table as the housing, financing, and development experts, and that's something they need to know as well. So they need your expertise, and in the homelessness sector, they need your ability to connect with what they would call hard to reach individuals. They need your expertise on outreach and engagement. They need your expertise on effectively engaging with people for services. That's something they need to work. And then other foundational questions, where and when? How is the funding flowing? How long? Different CARES Act and ARPA funding goes through. Some goes through 23, some goes through 26, some goes through 30. You've got to align those systems. CSH has materials on that. How do we bring these systems together to serve people more equitably? If you're working on ending homelessness, you've got good data on how vastly inequitable these systems are. As if you were if you've got a potential partner who's working on mass incarceration, again, huge inequities in these systems. Equity is becoming a priority throughout many, many federal funding streams and federal priorities, et cetera. How does the work that you're doing begin to build health equity in your community, begin to build broader community equity in your community? How can you be part of that equity related solution? And again, be specific. What are you building today? What system are you building for tomorrow? What potential new money are you looking for? Again, the tenancy support services benefit is not available in every state, but we see a number of states have been adopting it very, very quickly over the last 3 to 5 years. We expect a lot of other states to see this potential as well. And so think about how you're building towards that. Next slide, please. So CSH has some materials that we've done for a number of other states. We're happy to share and engage with you on this as well. We'll mainly direct you to our local offices who's leveraging American Rescue Plans to drive housing solutions. This is my home state of Pennsylvania. It talks about what are the different monies that is coming from home art, from emergency housing vouchers, but also from the services side. New money that's coming to health centers, new money that's coming to our behavioral health systems, new money that's coming to our home and community-based services systems. And so you want to be able to look and you want to be able to leverage that. We also recommend that you use CSH's 2 tools we have. One is our supportive housing needs assessment, what number of units for what populations are needed in your communities. And then the second is our RDDI, our racial disparities and disproportionality index. Again, you're making the case that your supportive housing development can address equity in your communities and working towards having each and these different services models. So framing your discussion that way. Next slide, please. There's a question in the chat that said it would be great to think about specialty clinical services that need to be woven, domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health. Danielle, what I would want to say is that we're focused here specifically not on what the services are, but what the pots of funding are that you need to begin to build collaborations with your state level leaders on this, collaborations with your advocacy level leaders on this, and collaborations with your local providers. Do you want to partner? Do you want to deliver it yourselves? What does your agency do well? How is your agency looking to grow? Where is your agency looking to partner? These are the strategic internal conversations that you need to have in order to be ready for these times. So cross-sector partnerships strategically begin in 3 different places that I want to highlight and think about and have you think about where is this happening in your community, and if it's not happening, where can you start that conversation? One is goals and policies. What are these priorities for the state? What are the priorities for the local communities? And where is supportive housing a solution? Supportive housing is a solution we've known for a very long time, this solution to ending homelessness for people, particularly for people with disabilities, but it's also a solution for people who are what I would call overly institutionalized. It's a solution for people who are trying to re-enter the community with significant disabilities. Find those joint opportunities and make your case in that manner and build your coalition that is advocating for more supportive housing using those different lenses, the equity lens, the mass incarceration lens, the criminal justice lens, the aging lens. COVID, unfortunately, sadly, has given us another lens here. It's particularly the high rate of COVID deaths from people who were in congregate care settings. And congregate care can be nursing homes, it can be psychiatric institutions, it can be group homes, it can be a variety of different settings in which people are living with people that they did not choose to live with, but they have to live with because of their disability and their extremely low income. Supportive housing is another solution there. Make that case. You want to build networks among people and providers. So think about this as at an advocacy level, at a local and state level. You want to know who those advocates are, how your agenda aligns with theirs. You want to know, particularly at the state level, who those funders are, and what those and what advocacy, what feedback loops, what public comment periods they have, et cetera, so that you can begin to partner in public and deliver public comments on them as well. Kayla, I see a question on here. Where can we find more information on the impact on COVID and congregate care? I will, when I'm done presenting, I'll go back to my Google search and get you that. So goals and policies. You want to align between sectors, you want to align goals, you want to align policies. Second is building referral systems for future development, flipping that pyramid that we talked about earlier, how to ensure equitable distribution of these new resources, how do you ensure distribution of resources so they address the longstanding institutional and systemic races in our communities, and then how do you plan for the future? How do you make sure that negotiating multiple systems falls on the systems, falls on the providers, does not fall as much on the individuals? And commonly you see people are making decisions about how they deliver how much investment systems make from a data integration process. How can you leverage the data you have? How can you share? How can you match? How can you find how much overlap there is? CSH's Fuse, frequent user system engagement model, is a common model that communities use in order to fix that data, in order to determine that overlap between systems. And finally, quantify and be able to act. You are asking for specific numbers, you are asking for specific units. CSH has a cross-system, cross-sector partnership roadmap that there's also a link on here as well. And that is, what was I going to say? That is geared right now towards the child welfare system, but we're working on building that out, and the fundamental values in that are, and the fundamental steps are similar no matter the system you are working with. Let's see, so next slide, please. So the takeaway messages from my section are: define your priorities, define what's important to you, define how you want to grow, define your populations, define the resources, strategically gather those partners. There is no one in any community who has all of these boxes checked. See what unchecked boxes you have. You maybe aren't very sophisticated on data. You don't have a billing system. Is there somebody that you can partner with who does? You may be advocating really commonly and effectively in the housing space and not at all with the medicated services space, behavioral health services, aging services, youth services. You want to strategically gather those partners and build those coalitions that will begin to have more impact. You want to think about the present and the future. This should be part of your strategic planning process. Where do you see growth potentials for your agency over the next 3 to 5 years, over longer, et cetera. And then you want to ensure that equity is foundational. You want to ensure that these services are getting to the people. These services are informed by the individuals. And with that, I will take a breath and ask if there's any questions, or Amber, where do we go next?
Great. We're going to pass it off to Raphael to tell us about, to talk about a hotel conversion project in Danbury, Connecticut.
Thank you for having me here. I hope to give you all a bit perspective on just a new initiative that we have started with kind of taking the opportunity of the new resources coming in. We are now currently involved in Danbury, Connecticut, where we had a crisis with the lack of shelter. And an opportunity arose where we were able to buy a hotel with the support of the Department of Housing, Connecticut, to be able to service that community. We recently in May bought a 85-bed hotel, which we hope to provide emergency shelter services as well as 44 units of permanent supportive housing. And, you know, as I was sharing with Elisa, we kind of sort of find ourselves in a position where we're sort of writing the book as we go. We're trying to learn and look at the type of how we approach the acquisition of the hotel and how do we transform it into being suitable for both permanent supportive housing as well as to be able to provide the emergency services that are sorely needed in that community. And there were quite a few considerations that we really had to take into account. One of them, you know, when you're looking at buying any facility, you really have to be able to look at the condition of the facility and determine whether the facility actually meets the needs that you want to repurpose that facility for. The other thing that's equally as important is the cost of the facility. And one of the metrics or measures that we use is the cost per unit. I could tell you that in Fairfield County in Connecticut, the cost per unit for us has been the most recent building we developed is about $100,000 per unit. And that's for like an SRO type unit. The facility that we purchased in terms of the hotel came out to about $53,000 per unit. So from a cost perspective, it certainly made a lot of sense for us. The other item we looked at is sort of the business model that we were looking to create. And one of the major aspects of it is sustainability. How do we approach this project in a way that is sustainable from the long-term perspective, not just the short-term perspective on how we're providing the services. And the realization for us is that as an organization in Pacific House, we are mission-driven. And I think part of the challenge is that understanding that we're not a profit-driven organization, and that would drive a lot of our decision-making as we were moving forward as a landlord. So the question came about, for example, how do we approach it in terms of property management? Do we do the property management ourselves, or do we outsource that? I will tell you that the decision we made was to be able to outsource that aspect to minimize the conflict between program versus property management and being the landlord. But with that said, then the question becomes identifying the property manager that would take that over and to be able to provide the delivery of services. The other aspect of our business model was to look at our partners, and in our case, it was the Department of Housing, and seeing if we were able to secure a certain number of project-based vouchers. We were fortunate that the Department of Housing gave us 42 project-based vouchers, which really allow us to operate the facility and meet all certainly the cost that's associated with running such a facility. I think in addition to that, it also allows us to be able to support the program services. As you might well know, it's very difficult to get program service dollars. And when you do get them, it usually doesn't cover your full cost. So by being able to build this business model, that not only the operational cost of the facility is maintained, we were able to also supplement the program service delivery. The facility we're developing is really going to be providing twofold. One of them is emergency shelter services. It's a 4-story facility. We're going to be using 1 floor for emergency shelter, another floor, two floors for permanent housing, and then 1 floor for support services, including a kitchen, a health clinic that's going to be attached to it, and open space to be able to provide program services and dining. Another consideration that we had to take into place was capital enhancements of the facility, and there's a cost associated with that as well. Architectural design. How are you going to set up the building to be able to meet the demands and the needs of the delivery of service that you're looking to provide? Looking at quality of service, one of the things that certainly, and that's essential in any planning that you have, as we've heard throughout this presentation. So we certainly are partners within our CAN system. That's the Coordinated Access Network that we all work within our COC. We looking at striving for quality through ushering in certainly evidence-based practices, as mentioned before, whether it's CTI, motivational interviewing, progressive engagement, and trauma-informed. And those are the quality aspects of it in terms of how we move forward in training and supporting our staff on those evidence-based practices. We encourage all our staff to certainly participate in both, not just internal training, but external trainings that are provided by CSH and other organizations. In our case, it would be Connecticut CCEH, which is Connecticut Continuum to End Homelessness, DOH that also provides training, and any regional CAN training that are offered to us. The other thing we engage in is certainly cross-training. One of the things that we look at as we move forward is to be able to provide cross-training for our staff to sort of keep them motivated and be able to understand what other departments and what other staff are providing within the COC. Looking at quality, One of the things that we did as a region, and this is the Open Door Fairfield County Continuum of Care, we participated in a learning collaborative in terms of how to address issues within our emergency shelters, which was part of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. We also look externally. As an organization, we provide internships to social workers and other social service human services schools, which really is great opportunity for a learning, not just for the students that are coming to us, but for us to learn from them and sort of create a learning environment within our organization. Another aspect of quality is looking at data, always being measuring data and making our decisions predicated on data that's driven by our COC network as providers. And, you know, we also look at the caseloads that we are provided to our case managers. For example, this facility, part of our planning would be looking at keeping the caseloads that are reasonable for us. It would be 20 tenants per case manager. In addition, as to exploring all other types of services that are necessary to ensure quality within our organizations, such as treatment compliance and so on, as we move forward. Lastly, one of the things that we, looking at is Housing First initiative, and would like to address that in terms of we're a Housing First organization. And what that basically means is that we really try to house as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, regardless of where they come from, whether it's from within our emergency shelter or someone living in the street. We take all our consumers from our by name list, which is by our CAN system. We provide outreach for out in the street for those that are currently homeless in the streets, and certainly work with them in providing them case management services to try to house them as quickly as possible. That's our primary focus, is to be able to move people within our system as quickly as possible, addressing all the needs that, regardless of the needs that they may have. And then work with them once they're housed to continue their plan of action, which can include mental health services, healthcare, substance abuse, and financial stability. That's it from me, Alicia.
Great, thank you, Raphael. I'm gonna pass it over to Kelly Ryder to talk about some things happening in her community.
Thanks, Alyssa. Thank you very much. I'm Kelly Ryder. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for the King County Department of Community and Human Services. Nice to be with you all today. For those of you who don't know, King County is the county that is home to Seattle, Washington. And we've got 39 cities in our county. And I think last I checked, we were like the 12th largest county in the country. So not surprisingly, with that, we have a large population of folks experiencing homelessness that we are trying to address with our Health Through Housing initiative. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Our Health Through Housing initiative is a broad initiative to be able to support supportive housing needs. It is implemented with a 0.1% countywide sales tax that was authorized for us by our state legislature as well as our county council. We expect right now that that sales tax is going to generate about $50 million per year ongoing. And so given that ongoing revenue stream, our ability to bond against those dollars for capital resources, we found this to be a particularly opportune time to be able to generate revenue to address our supportive housing needs. We adopted this new revenue source in October of last year. Many of you may remember, particularly last fall, we were all very much still struggling with recession impacts of pandemic. I know many of us are still struggling with that. And so a sales tax was not an easy lift, but I would say particularly given the stark impacts of homelessness across our region throughout the pandemic, and some of the learnings that I'll talk about that are similar to what you all have been experiencing, It was actually a relatively easy ask of our elected officials to be able to implement this sales tax. We implemented this sales tax with a very particular goal in mind. Oftentimes we peanut butter around our revenue sources to address various service needs and affordable housing needs. We started from the get-go. Our county executive proposed that this revenue source be solely focused on a paramount goal of achieving 1,600 units for affordable housing to serve folks experiencing chronic homelessness or at risk of chronic homelessness. And so that 1,600 goal continues to be the piece that we are starkly focused on and is driving the rest of our actions right now when it comes to this initiative. If you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. So through our Health Through Housing initiative, we are in implementation mode right now. We've got 4 main steps that you'll see here for each of these bullets. First, we are focused on acquisition. Out of the gate here in 2021, we have been trying to acquire enough buildings to reach our 1,600 unit goal. We have found that right now our market is allowing us to purchase existing buildings. And by that, I mean hotels. We were able to purchase a condo, an apartment building with studios. Sorry, is the word that I'm looking for. A studio apartment building that was new construction, that the market had changed and the developers just no longer wanted it for their intended original use. We've looked at nursing homes and a variety of different types of existing buildings that we can use for this purpose. We're finding them about $270,000 per unit to acquire, and that is compared with a new construction cost in our region of about $400,000. We know that this is very temporary. Acquisition is not going to work in all markets, and it's not going to work for all of our supportive housing needs, but we are trying to get access to as many units as quickly as possible, and for that reason, an acquisition strategy made sense to us. The second step that we are moving into right now is to be able to fund the actual operations of the buildings. And so we are contracting with our nonprofit partners to be able to provide the operations and services in these buildings. The acquisitions is happening by King County government directly. That is a very new thing for us. We do have a separate entity that's our housing authority, so the King County Housing Authority. There's also a couple of other city-based housing authorities in our county. And we have a variety of nonprofit partners that would traditionally identify the property, come in with a proposal to build on it or to be able to acquire it. And because we are trying to move so fast in this environment to acquire these buildings, because we wanted to really kind of narrow and isolate market competition for these buildings, we as King County are taking the sole responsibility for acquiring them in the short term. The operations and services, however, we are going to be very dependent on our local service provider community to operate the 1,600 units. And so we're working with them right now. We've put out a request for bids. We've produced a roster, so to speak, of service providers. We've got over 20 that have expressed interest in that. And we're just really excited that this will be this funding source allows us to solely fund operations in a way that we haven't traditionally been able to do in King County. Traditionally, we have to braid together multiple funding sources, as I'm sure many of your communities are used to, from different tax credits, from McKinney funds, from our state and our city governments. And instead, King County with this revenue source is solely funding these revenues so that we don't have to worry that any of the buildings will end up short of funding. We're also planning to fund them at our highest service costs that we've been able to estimate so far. And that's partly because we want them to be more robustly provided for. It's partly also because we are experiencing, as I imagine many of you are, a severe workforce shortage and challenge of attracting and retaining workforce to be able to work, particularly in the pandemic environment. In this sector. And so our estimates right now for operations are about $25,000 per unit per year. After we get done contracting, we will be working to open those buildings as quickly as possible. We're hoping to open all 1,600 units by the end of 2022. As you can imagine, we've got a lot of pressure to open them faster than that. And we're trying to work through community engagement practices, that contracting practice, staffing up, and getting folks moved in as quickly as we can. And then the final thing that I will add is we are also planning to fund the conversion of many of these buildings. We've been fortunate to find many of our buildings as like extended stay type hotels that already have kitchens built in, but we are acquiring hotels and other buildings that don't have built-in kitchens. And for those buildings, we will be looking to rehab them in the long term to be able to make them into full permanent supportive housing units. I'm going to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is just a scan of the many legislative steps that it has taken us to get here. And I say this just to say, depending on where you are at in your process, and if you're focused on just implementing ARPA funds, or if you're looking for some broader vision, these things never come easily in terms of generating the revenue. We were able to get access to this funding source and a councilmanic authority last spring at the end of our legislative session. It was just as the pandemic was starting, and we actually were not envisioning an acquisition strategy at the time. We took that authority and were able to implement the tax, but then had to go back to the state legislature for clarifying language so that we could acquire, and are still working with our King County Council on the actual implementation plan for the funding source. So many steps along the way, lots of elected officials, community members, stakeholders to be able to continue to work with, but we are at the last stage, so to speak, of our legislative process, and we're excited to be able to get that final approval of our implementation plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide just includes many of the links that many of you are probably familiar with in terms of proving why we are focused on supportive housing for people experiencing chronic homelessness in our community. Last year, as many of you, I imagine, did, we moved lots of folks into de-intensified shelters in hotels, and we did a fairly robust study with our local University of Washington on the outcomes of that work. We found that, not surprisingly, these single room settings were able to improve health outcomes, reduce the spread of COVID, and improve overall well-being and housing stability. And so building off of that, we decided that this hotel strategy could work for creating supportive housing. We know that our supportive housing clients are being stably housed. We have very low rates of folks returning to homelessness. And we also know that it's incredibly cost effective. And so based on that, we are continuing to look closely at our data, and we know that unsheltered homelessness and chronic homelessness in the King County region are particularly severe. And yeah, Suzanne, you can absolutely have that link. I don't know if the slides are being distributed. This link right here in this slide actually has that link to it. And then lastly, just a couple of notes on cost. As I mentioned, we're excited to be able to acquire these buildings at $270,000 per unit, but those services we know are going to be pretty pricey, and we are committed to ensuring that they are robustly funded at $25,000 per unit per year. If you want to turn to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is our portfolio right now. We have so far acquired 9 buildings, and we are on our way to 1,600 units. We've acquired our buildings across 5 different cities. We have particular requirements, both that we've committed to in consulting with the local jurisdictions in our county, but also that the state legislature has required of us. And so we are consulting and partnering closely and doing community engagement with our many city hosts. And we are still looking for 3 to 4 buildings in new cities. And so we're continuing the community engagement to be able to identify and acquire those buildings as well. You'll note here in the middle of the slide, I've noted operations only units. As we looked at this revenue stream, we were able to get to 1,600 units by leveraging other capital fund sources for 445 of those units. And so in our region, our city of Seattle has a housing levy that they invest in. Obviously, our low-income housing tax credits are a priority focus for our permanent supportive housing developers. And so in order to get to our 1,600 units, we are leveraging those other capital fund sources to do more traditional development of permanent supportive housing. And then the health through housing revenue source is paying for the operations and services for those units. And for the 25,000 operations versus services, I do not have that We are continuing to talk with providers about how to break that down. And so unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that today. If you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. So these are some of our pretty buildings that we are excited to have acquired. I'm looking forward to having lots of pictures with happy residents and staff in them, but this is what we have so far. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Eligibility for our health through housing buildings was very important to us to establish from the get-go. When we originally proposed the funding stream to council and to stakeholders, we knew that there would be a lot of interest in addressing a lot of diverse needs throughout our region. And so when we originally proposed this to our council, we were very clear that we planned to serve folks at 30% of area median income and below, and that we would be serving folks experiencing or at risk of chronic homelessness. And for that purpose, we've primarily followed the HUD COC definition of an existing disability and 12 months or more of homelessness episodes. We are trying to be a little bit creative, I guess, so to speak, on how we address needs of folks that are coming out of disproportionately impacted systems like our jails, like our hospitals and our behavioral health systems. And so that's where the at risk of chronic homelessness definition is coming into play. In the short term, we have plenty of folks that are experiencing chronic homelessness for us to focus on serving. So we don't imagine that we will be utilizing that at risk of chronic homelessness definition, but it is a population that we know is likely to need supportive services more than likely, even if they haven't reached that 12 months in 3 years or less length of time. A couple of other things that you'll see on this slide, we are trying to reduce racial ethnic disproportionality in who we serve in these buildings. And so in the King County area, we know that by and large, like many of your regions, Black and American Indian or Alaskan Native are disproportionately the most likely to be experiencing homelessness. We want to make sure that the residents that are able to live in these buildings are also representative of those folks most likely to experience homelessness in our region. We also have been required to have a specific local referral commitment where we will be partnering with the local cities to ensure that people that are nearby and connected to the community that's hosting these buildings has the opportunity to live in these buildings. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So this is just a scan of the many things that we are trying to fund in operations and services. I don't have the breakdown for you. As I said, we'll be working on that through our contracting process. What we have right now is here's how much money we have. We need to get to 1,600 units. And traditionally, it's cost us about $20,000 per unit per year to be able to fund them. How do we get those dollars up as high as we can? We know that our operations and services will need to fund property management expenses. 24/7 on-site staffing has been of particular interest to the cities and communities that we've been engaging with on this. We know that we will need a robust level of resident supports to make sure that the health through housing promise is truly achieved and that we can connect folks with the services that they need to stabilize their health and thrive in these buildings. And then the next piece around behavioral and physical healthcare is a piece that we are trying to ramp up in our commitment on these buildings compared with our traditional permanent supportive housing. We are trying a pilot program for right now where we have taken some of our ARPA federal funds and invested it in mobile behavioral health services with a particular priority for permanent supportive housing and our health through housing buildings. And the revenue stream over time has the ability to fund those services as well. We are also looking at where there may be opportunities to embed behavioral health clinics or other on-site behavioral health services and physical health services to be able to make sure that that connection to health is really strong and can best ensure that we meet the health needs of the residents in these buildings. And then a final thing that we will be asking of our operations and services providers is for the outreach and engagement. Community engagement has been of particular interest, especially in those communities that have not hosted supportive housing buildings before, I would say. We've been getting a lot of pressure and a lot of interest in lots of ongoing community conversations. And we know that the time that our operators and service providers will take to continue to engage with those residents, especially in the short term when there are lots of questions, is certainly a capacity need that they will have. We also are funding outreach and engagement of potential residents, like I said, in the nearby community, so that we can ensure that we are addressing disproportionality, that we're reaching the folks that need to be reached. We're doing that in coordination with our coordinated entry system, but we're trying to make sure that it is a complement and that we're not just relying on our regional coordinated entry system that, as I said, really is serving the very broad King County region. Noted here at the bottom, as we look to ramp up these operations and services, just want to note, at least for King County, how critical the workforce shortage and historic funding shortfalls have been on our supportive housing buildings. They are going to be key to getting them open and getting residents inside. And we are just trying to message that as clearly as possible in as many places as we can. The underfunding that we have traditionally done for this sector has really left it hampered in the pandemic, when at least we in King County have been asking so much of folks to stand up new shelter, to stand up new housing and other new mobile services, that we are really seeing that as a pinch point and something that King County takes particular responsibility for partnering with those service providers to address. Next slide, please. And I think this might be my last one. Just a note on how we are trying to advance racial equity through the work that we are doing with Health Through Housing. And this is a place where I will just say, I don't know that we have it right yet, but we are trying to embed a racial equity lens throughout all of our work and make sure that we are present in community in a way that allows folks to hold us accountable for achieving our equity goals. And so first and foremost, we did state an equity goal in the Health Through Housing and original legislation that the council adopted. It's in our King County Code to reduce racial and ethnic disproportionalities among persons experiencing chronic homelessness. That is something that we will be measuring to, and we will be expected to analyze and address as we move forward. It is also something that we are bearing in mind while contracting. We have a lot of traditional permanent supportive housing partners that are by and large white-led organizations that have a lot of expertise in operating these housing buildings. And then we have a lot of other partners that are BIPOC, by and for led organizations that are more embedded in the communities disproportionately impacted by homelessness, transgendered individuals, et cetera. And we are trying to figure out how we can engage both sets of expertise and how we can value both expertise in a way that ensures that the folks who need permanent supportive housing the most, again, by and large, Black and American Indian, Alaskan Native folks are getting the services that they need in a way that is culturally competent. Next, the outreach. We are also trying to ensure that we've got traditional outreach providers that are embedded in particular cities that may be very adept at being able to identify where folks are homeless from a traditional perspective. We also have a lot of Black and Native-led organizations that are more likely to know where their communities are throughout the region and how we can ensure that we engage them and get them captured in the folks that can eventually be referred into these buildings. We have committed to building capacity, and so we have funding in this initiative for a capacity building effort, a collaborative, so to speak, so that folks throughout all of those expertise and across all of our portfolio of potential service providers are able to engage in a capacity building collaborative. We know that this is going to be 1,600 units, but we need as much as or more than 6,000 supportive housing units to be able to address our total need. We need to continue to build capacity, both of the sector, but also of expertise to provide culturally competent and trauma-informed care. And then finally, we are working on inclusion and making sure that our advisory committee and every step along the way, we are finding ways to engage those folks with lived experience who are living in these buildings or have other experience to be able to offer about what it means to be homeless and in need of service of supportive housing, as well as ensuring that folks in our advisory committee are representative of those that are most disproportionately experiencing homelessness in our community. And if you want to go to the next slide, I think that might be it. Great. So that's what I've got, and happy to hear your questions and discussion.
Thank you, Kelly and Raphael. My name is Deirdre Bolden, and I will be facilitating some of our questions for each of you, but We really want to say first and foremost, thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us on this session and for sharing your fantastic and impactful planning and initiatives. Clearly, there's a lot of planning. They're very strategic efforts to address, the many needs within your community and ensure your residents are able to live in quality developments, but certainly, a lot of well thought out properties, a lot of sustainability elements, and certainly keeping quality services at the center of it all. Know that you all have addressed maybe some of the questions that we have for you earlier, but for the sake of our attendees, we want to ask just a few targeted questions that may be helpful to them. So I'll start with Raphael. You've mentioned, since the hotel conversions in Connecticut are a relatively new undertaking, that this initiative is considered a work in progress and that you're creating a how-to guide as you go. We'd love to hear about some things you've included in your how-to guide that surprised you or you didn't expect or were not initially anticipated.
This is totally new. So at least for us in Connecticut. So we just really didn't know what to expect. And I think that, you would think that given the crisis and what was going on, there would be community embracement of the ability for us to be able to do some of these things and helping people who are less fortunate to be able to be housed. And for us, the big challenge was working through a system that's really kind of not geared to be able to do the types of things that we want to do, and particularly with zoning. And that was the biggest surprise. How do we accommodate working within a zoning aspect to be able to get a hotel approved? And frankly, we're still not there because we're still going through zoning process to be able to address that. And then you have to be ready to deal with the NIMBY aspect of it within a community, which is a pushback on community residents from having any type of housing that's kind of reflects what we're looking to do. So that's another challenge that we face as a provider in the space and looking at trying new things. And in particularly when you go to a new community, which for us, is a new community, not one that we were as familiar with as we have been in Stamford and in Norwalk and Fairfield County, so that it created new challenges for us, and we're still learning as we go through the process. So for us, it just raised a lot of questions, both in embracing this as a model, but also, looking at the challenges of how do we make it work financially as well, because you really have to have the kind of model that comes together. And for us, an important part of whatever we do, at least in Pacific House, it's really whatever housing models we develop, we feel strongly that they should be sustainable from a long run. And how do you're able to bring about both the cost of acquisition, the cost of repair, and bringing a building up to capacity. And then from the long-term perspective, how to blend in the delivery of services that's required to be able to make that project sustainable for those consumers that are going to, and future tenants that are coming into the project. So those were all things, but for the biggest challenge for us, and it continues to be right now, has been the zoning aspect of it.
Okay. Yeah, that is probably raising its head in a lot of communities. Zoning is one of those things that's been on the books for many, many years, and no one was really paying attention to it until it became an obstacle. And so, yeah, we're hearing that in a lot of places. We've also, of course, this whole webinar is about the quality of services with this type of model of conversion. But we would love if you could expand on how you're planning to ensure quality throughout the operations? And this is still for you, Raphael. Does your staff, I think you spoke to some professional development opportunities, but are there any other quality focused initiatives, within your COC or state that are relative to ensuring the quality that you seek to have?
Yeah, we're partners as part of our continuum of care. And certainly we're looking at racial equality. We're looking at different models in terms of how we approach housing. And I think, one of the challenges we had as a system is coming to the realization that there really isn't any one model that addresses all the needs, that we really have to be very flexible in all the types of models we bring to bear. And that includes SROs, that includes shared units, that includes an independent living, both for individuals and families. And the struggle always is, how does that fit in from a qualitative perspective and a quality perspective in providing the proper support for our staff, whether, if you look at housing that's all in one building versus scattered housing. But as a system, we're really looking at embracing, as I mentioned earlier, evidence-based practices, and always examining what we have to offer and how we deliver the services. But in addition to that, we also partner with a lot of other organizations, such as CSH, to be able to really address training issues, and certainly go at multiple sources to be able to provide that. The last thing I would say is that we're also looking as a system to kind of codify and start looking at how we internally can supplement a lot of the training that we provide, because it's not just for case management services, but it's really training for everyone engaged in the system, whether from the moment you walk in, the hospitality, how to work with people, how to create uniformity across the board. Because one of the challenges is that if you look at a county, you have multiple areas of coming into the system. And the one thing we realized early on is that we didn't want to have a disparity of what the experience might be in one part of the county versus another part of the county. So it's really looking at our system that could create equity as well as continuity within that system. So it interacts in a way that it just adds to the quality of the experience for our consumers that are coming into the system.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, everyone has a role, right? And everyone that touches the households and the individuals being served needs to understand how to do that effectively and do that with care. So that's wonderful. I'm going to lift out now just a couple of questions that are coming through in the chat and I'll direct them to both of you if you don't mind. I'll start with you, Kelly, in terms of how do you address people who want or need to leave congregate care or long-term care facilities within your planning? Obviously, speaking to the fact that they won't meet the HUD definition or the criteria for chronic homelessness. Is that something that is being looked at within your plan?
Yeah, I would say at a global perspective, we are looking at it. We're super excited. The program manager for this initiative, Mario Williams Sweet, comes from the behavioral health world, where he was helping with referrals to our state behavioral health hospital. And so a lot of opportunity for connection there in the long term. I would say in the short term, in conversations that we've had with our homelessness team, they are really focused on the fact that there are too many folks that are currently already homeless and chronically homeless for so long that they believe need to be prioritized, that we will be focusing on those chronically homeless folks in the short term. But that at risk of chronic homelessness definition, as I mentioned, is around folks coming out of jails, coming out of the involuntary treatment system, et cetera. And so we do feel like there's going to be an opportunity in the long run for us to think about referrals coming from those other systems.
Yep. Yeah. And Raphael, I'll pose it to you as well. How to address people coming out of those other systems of care?
We're, as I mentioned earlier, a housing first organization. So we receive people who come into our system regardless of where they're at in terms of homelessness. You know, it's not unusual for us to try to house someone directly from the street right to housing. And you know, the big challenge is always for us, at least in Fairfield County, is the lack of resources in terms of what's available out there in terms of affordable housing. But from a system perspective, we certainly are very much attuned to that, and we have through our CAN a mechanism where anyone that's homeless gets matched to the housing that they are best suited for. So that's the system that we normally work within.
Okay, great. And so another question that came through globally in the chat, how important of a role has the home ARP funding, the federal funding, of course, that's coming into our communities, played in your acquisitions? And I know it's still rolling out, right? So it may or may not have been actualized quite yet, but certainly interested in your thoughts around how you are either planning to use it as well. So Kelly, will certainly allow you to address that question first.
Sure. So this specific program, Health Through Housing, is essentially funded in a silo with our sales tax revenue. And so home and ARPA funding have not been part of that revenue picture, except for where we have complemented it with the ARPA investments that we are making. We've got about $50 million that we've been able to invest in homelessness strategies with a particular focus on getting folks off the streets and addressing folks' unsheltered homelessness needs. And then as part of that, we are also funding the pilot for our behavioral health mobile teams to be able to serve permanent supportive housing and our Health Through Housing buildings. So those are places where we're trying to make some intersections, but otherwise we have not used ARPA or home dollars to be able to do acquisitions.
Okay.
Same thing for us. We're still in discussion phase with how to kind of create strategies on how to address that, both at a state level in addition to a municipality level. And depending on where you're at, the way the funds were coming in, actually in the state of Connecticut, only certain municipalities really have those home dollars that were designated to them. Most of the cities are smaller in scope, so it's handled through a state process. But with that said, I think the acquisition of the hotel is a perfect example of having new resources coming in, like CBDG and other sources, to be able to acquire new properties that can address the issue of homelessness and repurpose those properties. And I think that for us, we're the first and only one in Connecticut right now, but we hope that there will be many more as we move forward, and the utilization of those funds to be able to address a lot of the issues. But it's not just limited to repurposing properties, but you're also looking at the delivery system and how do you maintain that safety net and infrastructure that we've all invested in to ensure that there's continuity for that as well. So those discussions are still going on, and I think we're, hopefully soon we'll be having a better picture of how we want to allocate those funds.
Thank you very much. So these are a couple of questions, Kelly, that we had for your project. Certainly you spoke about you all's efforts to advance equity as a major goal of your initiative, and King County has a very explicit goal to reduce racial and ethnic disproportionality among persons experiencing chronic homelessness. Can you speak to a little bit at what point in the process did you begin to include the voices of people with lived expertise, and can you describe the responsibilities of your advisory committee that is in place?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we actually have been doing work on our homelessness system generally here for several years now. And out of that, a lived experience coalition has been born that is doing some amazing work and developing a lot of lived experience leaders to be leaders for our new King County Regional Homelessness Authority. I say that to set the stage that there is some analysis and long-term feedback that we have been receiving here over the last few years around the needs of supportive housing, around the needs of housing first and trauma-informed care. And that is helping to inform our strategies. I've also presented to that coalition to be able to talk to them about the Health Through Housing initiative overall. But I would say in this phase of like legislative development and funding strategy, we have not engaged them closely. And so it's a great question for us to do some thinking on. How can we bring them in more closely? I believe we have a stakeholder meeting that we host approximately monthly and a big stakeholder list. And I believe that some of them are part of that list. And so I think they've been getting engagement in that way. We just haven't gone to present to them and have some more small group discussion. In the longer term, as we look towards implementation, we, as I said, do plan to have folks with lived experience on our advisory committee. The advisory committee has a couple of different roles, focused primarily on how do we assess success of these buildings. And so in terms of performance measurement, we've got some high level ideas of what we think we need to be measuring and what it looks like to have success. But we expect the advisory committee to play a role in finalizing those lists of measures and how we should think about whether someone is being successfully served in our supportive housing. We expect those leaders with lived experience to be a part of that discussion. And then also in our reporting process to our council, other elected officials, that advisory committee really holds the responsibility for finalizing that report and how we kind of narrate the conversation around what our Health Through Housing initiative is accomplishing. And so how we talk about success, what the gaps are, the challenges, we absolutely expect that our folks with lived experience will have some thoughts about what is a priority to talk about and how we talk about things. And we're excited to be able to engage them in that way as well.
Yeah, that is so fantastic. Here at CSH, racial equity is really core to how we operate both internally as well as externally. And we just know the value of amplifying the voices of those with lived expertise from every phase of the processes. So thank you for taking that question and certainly for the thoughtfulness that will follow along with it. One final question for you. I'm just looking at time. I think we're getting close, but I think we have time for one or two more for both you, Raphael. You know, one of the many impressive aspects of the Health Through Housing initiative is really the scale to which your conversions are being completed and planned and how supportive housing is becoming operational. We'd like to ask again, just in a I know you may have spoken to it a little bit, but how did you engage the supportive housing service providers, and at what point were they brought into the planning of the initiative? And then is there a way to talk about how you are helping them to overcome some of their capacity issues? That is just you know, prevalent throughout. I know I heard someone speak of the fact that staffing is just premium right now, but you know, in what way are you engaging those providers and as a part of the overall initiative, and how can we address capacity?
Yeah, thank you. The service providers, I would say, in our community engage in a couple of different ways. We have some larger, and as I've talked about, more traditional service providers that really engage deeply around supportive housing. And so they have traditionally been kind of our go-to voices to understand what it looks like to succeed at supportive housing. We also have been trying to identify some new leaders in our community to lift up to engage with us in figuring out how we can do things differently, how we can address disproportionality in our community. And so I would say our engagement has really kind of been through concentric circles of finding some folks that really are ready to invest the time that can be our close advisors. We've got a couple of kind of membership organizations as well, our Housing Development Consortium and our Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness. Their staff have been close advisors. And so we've worked with them kind of particularly throughout the legislative processes. And there's always some push-pull, right? In the King County trying to say like, here's what we plan to do. And then them trying to understand why are you trying to do it? And how does that, how is that actually informed by what our expertise says that we need? But closely trying to work with them in terms of the legislative process. And now that we're in the contracting phase, we have tried to do a new and different thing with our contracting phase. And that, as I said, we had this kind of open, I'm not the contractor, but an open request, I think it was a request for information or something like that, that allowed a lot of folks to be added to the roster. And instead of being competitive right at the beginning, we tried to open the door. And now what we're trying to do is take that roster that actually identifies a couple of different types of providers, operators, service providers, outreach, and identify opportunities to partner. And so we're allowing for folks to find ways to see themselves on the roster, see others as the roster come together, and build those partnerships so that we can have new folks coming in. We know that some folks may very well apply on their own still, but trying to keep that wider open door. And now we're moving into contracting, where it will be a more traditional competitive process, where we will need to, comply with specific legal requirements around how we're doing that. We are trying really hard to not judge those procurements based on a lowest cost model. We are trying to judge those procurements based on how are you going to be complying with the principles of housing first and of engaging with community and things of that nature. We do kind of have a funding estimate that we're working with around $25,000 per unit per year. But when we have our providers coming to us and saying we can't provide it for this, what do we do and how do we adapt? We are trying to work closely with them. We've contracted for a couple of buildings so far on the timeline, on those contracts, to figure out where can we be flexible, where can we adapt given the current circumstance, and really try to be partners in this. Many of our housing buildings, I would say, we write the check and then the operators and the owners really go out and provide it. With King County as the owner here, we do have a little bit more of a stake in the game of the success. And so the providers, I would say, have a little bit more of the ability to call the shots and say, we cannot open that building for you. This is what it's going to take. And we're going through that push-pull right now. And I'm hoping that we're going to have those relationship building opportunities to make sure that we can invest in the workforce, that we can build capacity throughout that.
Yeah, there's plenty of work to go around, right? I think that certainly, like never before, the needs are greater than they've ever been before. And it's going to take all of us to get this done. So thank you very much, Kelly and Raphael, for being with us and for entertaining our questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Amber for the remainder of our Q&A, just to make sure that there's nothing that I've missed. I tried to follow the chat, but I don't know if there's any additional questions that we need to address. And certainly she will be able to share some follow-up information about our resources. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Deirdre. I also don't see any other questions that you missed. So if I'm also missing something, please let me know. There's some references in the Q&A. Folks should be able to see those links there. And if you go to the next slide, I just want to briefly say that we have launched the hotel to home landing page with conversion resources, and that will be where we'll post the recording and the materials. I know several people have asked for the slides and for a link to resources in the recording. So Mercedes has put that into the chat, the link to the hotel to home page. So just reference that if you are looking for the many resources that we mentioned today, as well as a link to this recording. And that's all I had. I don't know if anyone else had anything pressing that they wanted to mention before we close out.
Alyssa, did you have any other closing comments?
Nope, that's it. Just thank you all for attending. And I actually do want to just mention that this webinar was brought to you by Capital One as well.
Great. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you especially to our panelists for all of your wonderful expertise that you brought to the webinar today. So again, thanks everybody and have a good rest of your day.